بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين صلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا ومولانا وحبيبنا وشفيعنا رسول رب العالمين اللهم صل وسلم وزد وبارك عليه وعلى آله صلاة تخرجنا بها من ظلمات الوهم وتكرمنا بها بنور الفهم وتوضح عنا بها ما أشكل حتى يفهم أنك تعلم ولا نعلم وأنت أعلام الغيوب ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله السميع العليم ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله السميع العليم ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله السميع العليم. So yesterday we just did a general presentation for those who weren't there. Basically, I just explained what the course was going to be about and the objectives and who I am and so on and so forth. So if you haven't caught it, just watch the replay in the Telegram channel because there might be some important information for you. So today we're starting actually to look at the fiqh of marriage. And I know this is maybe a bad timing for most people in America because it's a lot of people are working or at school, but unfortunately it was the only time I had available. But it might not always be in the morning. Like I'm thinking of making it perhaps like Thursday evenings, but more info to come about that. So the basically to start from the beginning, we said that the science of fiqh is the science that studies voluntary human actions from the perspective of their legal ruling. That's like a simplified definition. There's a more technical one that the jurists use. And uh, basically, these human actions can be divided in two main categories, right? The acts of worship, al-ibadat, and the interactions or transactions, the mu'amalat. So we're not looking at fiqh al-ibadat at all in this course. Like I said, I already directed you towards other courses in that topic. So and now the second part of fiqh al-mu'amalat, it divides in three main topics. The first is fiqh of family affairs, which is what we're covering in this course. And then there's fiqh of financial transactions like buying and selling and renting and gifting and making waqf and things like that. And then the final part of fiqh al-mu'amalat looks at court proceedings as well as sanctions and basically the criminal code, like the hudud and the jinayat in Arabic. So, and then if we look at the chapter on nikah, on marriage, to look at a bit the structure of what's upcoming, there's two main topics in the chapter on marriage. And like I said, that's just the chapter on marriage. After chapter on marriage, there's other chapters that are related to marriage and family affairs. So there's like a certain number, like not very many, but there's a few chapters that we'll cover, inshallah, in Mukhtasar Khalid, but only partially, as I said yesterday. So the said two main topics in the chapter on marriage per se. The first is how to initiate a marriage contract and rulings relating to that. And the second topic is dissolving or breaking basically the bond of marriage. The first subtopic of that is what are the ways in which the bond of marriage can be dissolved, and the second topic, what are the legal repercussions of that, the dissolution of the bond of marriage. And then if we look at this first main topic, the chapter of marriage, which is establishing the bond of marriage, Khalil divided his chapter as follows. At first, he mentioned the rulings relating to basically initiating a marriage contract. So things that are recommended, things that are prohibited, things that are permissible, and then things that are disliked. And as for the obligatory things, he, instead of speaking of obligations, he mentioned the pillars of marriage. And according to Khalid, there's four. There's the formula. So basically what the wali and the husband say to have basically the formula of offer and acceptance. And then the wali, so the conditions, that relate and rulings that relate to the tutor of the woman. And then the mahal, which is the locus, basically conditions of validity that and rulings that relate to the spouses themselves. And then the dowry. So this is going to be what we'll be looking at for a while. It'll comprise four sections within the chapter on marriage. So the first section, which is kind of the one that gives you the pillars of marriage, and then the second one will be about the actually no, this will be yeah. Uh, then he'll talk about the wali still in the first section. He'll start talking about the mahal, meaning the spouses in the first section, and then he'll mention a section about opting out of marriage for defects that are discovered after the contract, and then another section on the slave girl who's woman who's married and to a slave, and then she is freed. So of course we're not going to cover that in this class because it's not relevant for our times. And then there's a section on the dowry. So basically there'll be one, two, three, four sections that relate to establishing the marriage contract. All right, so now to start, now that I've mentioned the structure, we'll start with the definition of marriage, the legal definition. So for that, I'll share on my screen a document that I wrote, which has just part of an unpublished book that I have. I don't know when this part will ever make it out, but like I said yesterday, I'm hoping to get the first volume out fairly soon there on ritual purity and salah. Okay, so this definition here is kind of a translation from Imam al-Dardir's definition in Aqrab al-Masalik with like one slight modification. And the reason why we look at the definition is that because we're talking about a topic, we need to have proper conceptualization of the topic at hand. And then after that, we are going to look at the wisdoms behind the prescription of marriage. And then we're going to look at the ruling of marriage. And then we'll start Khalil and look at a few masail that are recommended with respect to initiating a marriage contract. So that's our program for the day, inshallah. Okay, so legally speaking, marriage is a contract that makes sexual enjoyment permissible with a female of Abrahamic faith who is not one's mahram nor a Jewish or Christian slave by means of a formula. So let's break it down step by step and unpack it. So first, a contract, which means there's two parties involved that make an agreement between themselves and it requires mutual consent. Each party has to be consenting. Now, who are we talking about here? We're not necessarily talking about the spouses here. We're talking about the two people that take part in the conclusion of the contract. So basically, the wali on the woman's side, or his wakil, like his deputy, you could say, the one who represents him. And on the husband's side, you have either the husband or his representative or deputy. And we'll see more about that later, like how do you deputize and who can be deputized and so on and so forth. So these are the two contracting parties, basically the husband and the wali. And we'll look at the issues of the women's consent later, inshallah, when we talk about the topic of the wali. Okay, so contract. So because it's a contract, of course, it requires a formula. Because how would you know that two people have agreed to something unless they expressed their agreement? So that's why it needs a formula, and the formula is a pillar of the marriage contract. And then, okay, so what's the legal effect of this contract? The legal effect is that it makes sexual enjoyment permissible with a female of Abrahamic faith. So why are we focusing on sexual enjoyment? Because there's more to marriage than that. It's because this is actually the only legal effect, because here we're in a course of Islamic law, so we're focusing on legal aspects. So because as far as the other parts of marriage, like having a close bond with somebody or loving somebody or yeah, uh, being like isolated with a person of the opposite gender, it can happen and it can be lawful in other situations, right? Like you could have a really close friend, right, of the same gender, and you can now uh, you can be in the same room together. You can have a yeah, basically you can have share your intimate thoughts with them. So there's like similar elements that you can find in marriage. And also, like, you can be alone with like somebody of the opposite gender, but that's a mahram to you, right? Like your sister, your daughter, your mother, maybe you're really close, right? So the only thing that sets marriage apart, legally speaking, is the fact that is basically the sexual and sensual enjoyment. So the highest being actual intercourse, and the lowest being just gazing at the person, which and all that, of course, is normally prohibited between non-mahram men and women. Okay, so now we say with a female. Okay, so now we're talking from the man's perspective here. So from the Muslim man's perspective, so with a female, so not with a male. So already that rules out same-sex marriage, right? So that's not a nikah. It's invalid and haram. And why female instead of woman? Because it's actually valid to marry a jinn woman, for a man to marry a female jinn. It probably doesn't happen a lot, but if it did, it would be permissible and valid. As for the opposite, it's not valid though. It's not valid for a woman to marry a male jinn. Why? Because then she could have fornication or adultery and get pregnant, and then claim that the one who got her pregnant is her jinni husband, right? So that, of course, that excuse wouldn't fly in court, and she would still get the had punishment. So that's why it's not permissible. And then of Abrahamic faith is because for a Muslim man, you have three choices. Either you marry a Muslim woman or a Jewish woman or a Christian woman. And of course, we'll see the rulings as for like it's disliked, right, to marry a Jewish or Christian woman. I'm just throwing it out there right now in case somebody's like, oh, it is for all right, I'll go and do it right now. No, it's in non-Muslim countries, it's even highly disliked, and some muftis even prohibit it. So it's definitely not the thing to do. And then who is not one's mahram? So mahram is a term that means basically somebody you're not allowed to marry, and it includes some blood relatives and some in-laws and some of the people that you share nursing bonds with, and all that will be detailed in this course, inshallah, later. And then as for nor a Jewish or Christian slave, that's because Muslim men can marry Muslim slaves in under some conditions only, but never can they marry Jewish or Christian slaves. Of course, that's not relevant nowadays, and by means of formula, I already explained it. Okay, so that's for the definition. Okay, I see there's a question. Okay, how can a man engage in intimacy with the jinn if he cannot see them? I don't know. Honestly, I haven't looked at the practical ramifications of this. Basically, all I know is that it's permissible and valid. So if it were that maybe she takes human form, I'm not sure how this works really. It's really purely a theoretical issue for the most part. I don't think we'll ever need it. This was just because I was using Sidi Ahmed al-Dardir's definition. The only difference is that he said that to make sexual enjoyment permissible. And then that brings up an objection. And Sheikh Zuhair said if we replace it by makes sexual enjoyment permissible, then this objection is lifted. Okay, so now the wisdom behind marriage. So first, it protects the spouses from the otherwise evil consequences of their sexual desires, because if you don't have a lawful outlet for these desires, then you're likely to fall into sin. right? So it could be as small between brackets as masturbation, or it could be worse, even worse, by going out and actually fornicating with somebody. And fornication is one of the worst sins. So then, giving the spouses a small preview of the delights of paradise, because sexual pleasure is one of the highest pleasures you can have in the dunya. So it thus might give you a hint, a small hint of what the delights of Jannah could be like. And of course, the pleasures there are more intense and more lasting. So it might give the spouses more motivation to strive for the akhirah, for the hereafter. And then you have fulfilling the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to perpetuate humanity on earth until Judgment Day. So basically, by multiplying and having children, this is a means to achieve this end. And then fulfilling the wish of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam to boast of the large number of members of his ummah to the other uh, prophetic communities on Judgment Day. So there's a hadith about this where the Prophet ﷺ encouraged us to get married and to have children because verily he will be boasting of our large numbers on Judgment Day in front of the other communities, the other ummah. And then you have the advantage of being remembered after your death, because if you have children, uh, after you pass away, they'll be continuing your remembrance and mentioning you and so on and so forth. So it's like you won't be completely gone from the memories of people on earth. And then maybe like your children will have children and so on and so on, and they'll remember who their lineage is. Like they'll have their family trees and so on and so forth. So you'll be remembered. Also, it helps you to be raised in degrees in the hereafter if you have pious children. If they make dua for you as they should, then it will increase you in degrees in the hereafter because it's something that benefits you. It's like you have ongoing good deeds after your death because your deeds are all cut off except for three things, as the Prophet also mentioned in a famous hadith, right? Basically, the idea of the pious child and the sadaqah jariyah, right? The continuous charity, like building an orphanage or digging a well, and then teaching beneficial knowledge, like we're doing here, inshallah. And then being taken seriously in one society, because people who are unmarried, they never get married. It's like people always consider them to be among the youth, and their ideas and thoughts aren't taken as seriously. Also, having the chance that one of one's young children may pass away at a young age, and if that happens, then the young child would intercede in his parents' favor on Judgment Day. So, of course, it's a sad, very difficult trial to lose a young child, but their benefits are also great. All the trials that we go through, there's always great benefits in them, even though we often fail to see that and remember that. And then finally, well, there's two more. So experiencing emotional intimacy with one's spouse. So if it's not just physical intimacy, there's also emotional intimacy. And this is a type of intimacy that you can't really get with anyone else, right? There's a certain, if you're properly compatible with your spouse, you'll get this sort of closeness that you won't have, with anyone else. And this helps to I guess, prevent depression, right? Because when you're single and you don't have this close connection with somebody, you might feel heavy. You might feel heavy-hearted, and the loneliness might basically drag you into sadness. So this is a way to avoid this. And finally, attaining financial prosperity, because the Prophet ﷺ said, and even there's hints to it in the Quran as well, that marriage actually brings about financial prosperity, even though we think from the man's perspective that it would decrease it, but that's not the case because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He creates the causes and He creates the effects, and there's no any necessary relation between the causes and the effects. So He can make, when you do something, He can make a result, create a result that is completely unrelated and seems illogical. So, but this is the case here, just like when you give charity, your wealth doesn't decrease, it actually increases. So see, it's counterintuitive, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He creates what He wills. Okay, so and also when you have children, you also get extra rizq or provision, and that's also counterintuitive because each child comes with his own rizq. And Sheikh Zuhair mentioned that there's also benefits to celibacy, and there's some people who chose it, and we'll see like in what kind of conditions when we go over the ruling of marriage, inshallah. But as a whole, marriage is something that's encouraged because it's the only lawful outlet for sexual desires, and long-term abstinence could be it's kind of incompatible with our animal nature, right? Because as human beings, we have the bodies of animals and we have the soul, basically almost angelic souls, in the sense that uh, our souls are fed by the remembrance of Allah, just like the angels, and they don't need to eat or drink, just like angels, they don't eat or drink, and they don't need to reproduce. Angels don't reproduce. They don't need, the soul doesn't need to go to the bathroom, right? And all these things that are specific to bodies, right? Yeah, so we have these two different natures, and so we can't ignore the fact that we have, these animal bodies with animalistic needs. So that's why it only makes sense for most people so that they can stay, psychologically and physically healthy to get married. And also to avoid the sin of fornication, as we said earlier. Okay, so this brings us now to the ruling of marriage. The basic ruling of marriage is that it's mandub, so it's recommended. But it differs, the actual ruling differs from person to person based on his situations. So that's why like the scholars they mention all these different possibilities because there's so many different circumstances that are possible that it would be kind of misleading to just say to everybody marriage is recommended. So instead, they break it down and say that if you're in this situation, then it's like this is the ruling, and if you're in this situation, it's this ruling. So we'll go through it, inshallah, because it's important for everybody to figure out, especially those who are single, uh, what would be the ruling for them regarding getting married. And this ruling, it applies equally to men and women. And even it applies to men who don't have four wives, as far as like taking an additional wife. And yeah, I guess from going back to the definition, I forgot to mention from the woman's perspective. So the definition would be that it would be to make sexual enjoyment permissible with a Muslim man, right? So for the Muslim woman, there's only one option. It's to marry a Muslim man. So here it wouldn't be Muslim male because the jinns are excluded, right? So it would be Muslim man. All right, so the ruling of marriage. So the first thing you need to look at is, do you think that you'll fall into adultery or fornication if you don't get married? If the answer is yes, meaning you're sure or fairly sure it's going to happen, then marriage is obligatory for you, no matter what. Of course, yeah, okay. Now then if you don't fear that, then you have to ask yourself a second question. Would marriage lead to doing something prohibited or not doing something obligatory? If the answer is yes, then marriage is haram for you. Example, a man who knows of himself that he's, let's say, impotent, or he has his penis is so small he wouldn't even be able to have intercourse, or he's poor, so poor that and he has like no way of getting income, so he couldn't pay the dowry or support his wife. So yeah, all these would make marriage prohibited because it would lead to him knowing ahead of time that he's not going to be able to fulfill the rights of his wife. And as for something, not doing something obligatory would be like somebody's got a job, he has some income and he has like a low-paying job, but they allow him to pray during his breaks. And then if he were to get married, his financial his budget would need to increase by a lot, so he'd have to take a job, and the only job that's available to him is one where they wouldn't allow him to pray on his breaks, let's say, so that he would be missing the whole like mukhtar time of the prayer, in which case it would be haram for him to get married. Okay, so if this wouldn't happen, if you get married, then you need to ask yourself another question. Do you desire to have intercourse or to have somebody to take care of you? If the answer is yes, then marriage is recommended for you, but not obligatory. And if you don't desire that, then you have to ask yourself yet another question. Would marriage prevent you from doing something recommended? Like, let's say you're in the habit of working and giving your money in charity to get rewards from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or taking from your time to benefit the Muslims in a way or another, like helping like new converts get settled in the deen, or like teaching fard kifaya, like communally obligatory knowledge, or doing like other kinds of voluntary actions that would require time or money, and you feared that if you would get married, you wouldn't have time to do this anymore, then it's makruh or disliked for you to get married. And a lot of scholars, they fell into this category, not like a whole lot, but there were quite a few throughout history. They never got married because they feared that marriage would prevent them from spending as much time as possible learning and teaching the deen. And then if the answer is no, it wouldn't prevent you from doing something recommended, then you have to look at, okay, do you desire to have children? And do you think you're physically able to have children? If the answer is yes, if the answer is yes to both these questions, it's recommended to get married. And if you don't want children, or you don't think you can have children because you might have a sterility issue, but you're getting married for a virtuous motive, like help supporting a widow, then it's recommended. And finally, if you don't desire children or don't have the ability to have children, and you don't have a virtuous intention behind your marriage, then marriage is just merely permissible, meaning you wouldn't get rewarded for it and you wouldn't get punished for it. Okay, so now I'm just gonna bring up a couple points, inshallah, related to the ruling of marriage that Sheikh Zohair brought up in class. So the first is, he said that he noticed that in Arab culture, it's often seen as blameworthy to help one's father get remarried after one's mother passes away. He said that that shouldn't be. They shouldn't see it as a treason to one's mother, because father is a human being, he has needs and everything, so you should help him, assist him in finding somebody. And the same applies to one's sister or daughter. We shouldn't view it as something blameworthy to present somebody to our daughter or sister, or to present our sister or daughter to somebody. Of course, somebody who's good, of course, not just anybody. Uh, and then finally, concerning our mother, let's say if our father passes away and now our mother is single, or if she's divorced, then what's the ruling about helping our mother find somebody? Sheikh said that there's a difference of opinion in the school about that, depending on there's a difference of opinion in the school on, is marriage considered a necessity or just something that's good to have. Okay, so according to those who view that it's a necessity, then it's permissible to help one's mother in all situations. And those who say that it's not a necessity, they say that you should always, it'd be impermissible to present somebody to her. But so Sheikh Zoya said basically what we should take away from that is that we should look at our mother's situation. If she's still young, or if she is living alone because like her children moved away, grown up, and she has nobody to take care of her, and we think that she would like to have that, then it's permissible to help her find somebody. And otherwise, then it would remain. We should go by the opinion that it's not permissible. The second issue that Sheikh brought up is that it's for people who have same-sex desires. The best remedy for that is to get married, to actually get married, of course, to somebody of the opposite gender. And because he says that this attraction that they have and this what they imagine that they can get with the same sex is actually just an illusion. It's just a fruit of their imagination. And if they experience, true marriage, the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala designed it for mankind, this might turn them away from this attraction. And of course, if it doesn't work, I mean, he should have the sincere intention to change and make lots of dua and give it the time that it takes and take steps to like abandon bad company or any negative influences that would kind of drag him back towards that kind of stuff. Um, but if it doesn't work, even after trying for so long, at least having a wife or a husband, in the case of a woman with these kinds of tendencies, would provide a lawful outlet for the sexual desire. So even if it's not as fulfilling as they think it would be with the same gender, at least it does something and would help them remain chaste and stay away from the sin of same-sex sexual relationships. And of course, I didn't mention this when it said woman there in the definition of marriage. As for transgenders, we don't consider them legally to be of the gender that they switch to. So we will always treat them as, the gender that they were born with. So we don't consider that whatever they do in terms of hormones and surgery makes actually legally and essentially makes them into the gender that they think they have switched to. So if somebody was born a man and then he did all the operations and hormones, we still consider them a man. So this quote unquote woman wouldn't be allowed by Sharia to marry a man, right? It would be considered a man, so he could only marry a woman. So just felt I needed to throw that out there with all the confusion on this nowadays. And then okay, no, this issue I won't bring it up. Okay, so now we're ready to start with the text of Mukhtasar. Okay, so this is the copy of Jawahir al-Iklil, Dar al-Fikr edition. So the text of Khalil is in that box. So here's the beginning of the chapter on marriage, and he begins with just mentioning the ruling because he starts by nudiba, right? So these are recommendations, and he lists a series of recommendations, and the first one is actually getting married. So he says nikahu, right? This is the subject of the verb. So the first recommendation is getting married, but not for anybody, for people who need marriage, limuhtajin. So in my little free chart, it was the person who desired to have intercourse with somebody who desired to have somebody to take care of him. And then the uhbah is that he has the means to get married, meaning he's able to have intercourse, he's able to pay the dowry and to financially support his wife. So this would be like the condition that we said that it would not lead him to doing something haram. Okay, so Khalil, of course, he didn't go into all the details. You have to read the commentaries to get all this, the elements that I used to make that tree chart. And then he says bikrin, right? So some objected because he said nikahu bikrin means that the recommendation is to marry a virgin. So here we don't even have we don't understand that it's actually recommended to get married, and second recommendation to marry a virgin. It's like he put it into one. But there's other manuscripts in which there is a separation. So it would be nikahun wa bikrun for those who understand Arabic. So it would be to get married and to marry a virgin, which would be the second recommendation. In any case, regardless of what the authentic text is in Khalid, they are in fact two distinct recommendations. So it is recommended for men to marry a virgin. It's a general recommendation. It doesn't apply to all cases, as we'll see. So why? First of all, because the woman who's already been married before, she'll have the tendency to compare. This is maybe something that's more ingrained in female psychology, but she'll be comparing how you how you eat, how you sleep, how you speak to her, how you know do certain activities with her, how you do even foreplay and sexual intercourse and your looks and these kinds of things. She'll be comparing you. And men definitely they don't like to be compared, neither do women for that matter. But it's something that would particularly bother uh, males. And then the second aspect is that men would generally be more, how to say, fulfilled with their marriage if they knew that the woman that they have in front of them has never been with another man. So there's never been another man in her heart, and there's never been another man inside her body, and so on and so forth. So there's something that men would definitely appreciate concerning that, and it would help them, inshallah, to be fulfilled and thus the marriage would allow them to remain chaste, which is actually the highest objective of marriage with respect to Sharia, right? So there's three objectives. The first is to make one chaste. The second is to provide companionship, which is that would be a need, right? And then the third, which would be just something nice, it would be to provide good companionship. So if you've got the right person, inshallah, then you'll have good companionship. So it'll improve your quality of life, basically. So these are three levels. It's the jurists, they use them in for giving fatwa, and if people know them, they can use them to reason and decide on their actions sometimes when they don't have the ability to consult scholars. So the daruriyat, or the necessities, they're things that relate to the universal objectives of the Sharia, which are preserving one's religion, preserving one's life, preserving one's intellect, preserving one's wealth, and preserving one's honor. And then some add lineage, and others combine honor and lineage in the same. So there's 5 or 6 universal objectives of the Sharia. All the legal rulings that you'll find in the Sharia, they all go back down to these 5 or 6 general principles. And then hajiyat, the needs, are things that life is difficult. You know, it's possible, but it's difficult without them. And the tahsiniyat, the things that are just nice to have, like the beautifications, you could say, of life. These are things that just make life more pleasant. But if you don't have them, it's not that difficult. So that's how the scholars, they use this to give fatwa. They look like, okay, what is this thing that he's seeking? Is it like will there be consequences that you know, are connected to the daruriyat and necessity? Anyways, now's not the time to get into that. But so yeah, so I was saying that the marrying a virgin could assist the man in being more chaste, and thus um, be able to fulfill this higher objective of marriage. And then, okay, so when is it more appropriate to marry a woman who's not a virgin? And what's meant by virgin here is not like the customary definition. It's not a woman who has an intact hymen. It means a woman who's never been married before. So Sheikh Zuhair said for men who have young children from a previous marriage or young siblings with them when the mother passed away, it's preferable to marry a woman who's already been married. So she has more experience, more endurance, more patience. So and she's better usually able to take care of children. So that's a good match in that case. And I would add to that that it really depends. Like sometimes you might have, the options aren't necessarily that great, and you'll find that there's this woman who's been married before, but mashallah, she has so much taqwa, she has knowledge, she has great character, and you find yourself to be very compatible in terms of personality. And then you have this virgin woman who's, not so practicing, and she doesn't have the same qualities. So of course you're going to go for the one who has these qualities, right? So it's just a question of common sense. So people shouldn't just take um, this recommendation and just apply it blindly. It's just like it's been mentioned in a couple of hadith, so that's why the fuqaha mention it here. And now, what about the question of virginity certificates, right? I don't know if you've ever heard of those, but in certain cultures, they request them. So that's something that has no basis in the Sharia, right? It's not permissible for anybody other than the husband, right, to go and look and examine to see if the hymen is intact or if it's been ruptured, right? And it's not even permissible to ask the woman if she's a virgin or not, because if she says, uh, if she's actually, uh, let's say she had like unlawful relations before she got married and then she repented, right? And now she's like on the straight path. Now, if she says yes, then you're making her lie. And which she has to in that case. And if she says no, then she's admitting to having done zina, which is admitting a sin, which is haram again for her. So basically, you're putting her in a situation where she can't get out of it. Whatever she says, she's gonna do something wrong. So that's why, if you absolutely want to marry a virgin, what you need to do is request it, put it as part of your conditions. Say like when you're talking to her or talking to her wali, you say, okay, I'm looking for a woman who's like this and this and this. And then if she sees that she's not what you're looking for, then she just says it like that. She says, I'm sorry, but I don't think I'm compatible with you. So that way she's not, put in a tight spot like that. Okay, so then Khalil radiallahu anhu wa ardahu says, وَنَظَرُ وَجْهِهَا وَكَفَّيْهَا فَقَطْ بِعِلْمٍ. He says that it's recommended for the suitor to look at the uh, yani, potential wife's face and hands only with her knowledge or with the knowledge of her wali. Okay, so I guess there's three conditions to the permissibility of looking at your potential spouse before agreeing to marry her. And the same actually applies for women. It's actually recommended for them to look at the face and hands of their potential spouse as well before agreeing to marry. So the first is that you only look at the face and hands, so no more than that. So it's not permissible to see her hair, and it's not permissible to see her naked, as like some stray opinions can be found, in different books nowadays. But definitely not the Malikiya. I haven't done tahqiq of that in the other schools, but that's definitely not permissible. Not even the hair. The second is that it be done without the intention of seeking pleasure. So the intention should just be that you want to see what she looks like, to see if you think her looks will be sufficient, to keep you chaste, let's say, if there'll be sufficient attraction. So that's your intention. If it's just to derive pleasure and enjoy her looks, it's haram to look at her there. And finally, that it be done with her knowledge or the knowledge of her wali. But nowadays, in almost all situations, it would be her knowledge that would be required. So you can't do it when she's like not aware. For example, you go and like find her on Facebook and like look at her profile picture without her knowing, or you kind of go, that she goes to like this campus and that she's taking this class. So like you kind of wait for her kind of outside the classroom and just to get a glimpse, or something like that. That wouldn't be permissible. She has to be aware that you're doing that when you're doing it. And then some people might object. Okay, well, why are you saying that it's permissible to look at if you have all these conditions, whereas normally it's permissible to look at a woman's face and hands. This is why women, don't typically cover their faces and hands out in public. So the answer is that it's normally in this kind of situation, it's the default ruling would be that it would be haram to even look at the face and hands because in the context of marriage, there's a high likelihood that there's going to be pleasure derived from the looking, and that's haram normally. But here, because of the great need for people to actually see the person they're going to marry, because it's an important factor to see if there's going to be like physical compatibility and physical attraction, then the Sharia has made a way out, a means for it, but with a set certain conditions for it to be permissible. And then there's even a difference of opinion as to like when these conditions are met, is it permissible or recommended? And some say that those who said it's permissible actually meant that it's not haram, so it's not necessarily a ruling other than recommended. But Allahu A'lam in the end. The point is it's either permissible or recommended. Now, can you send somebody else to do this looking in your stead? The answer is yes. If it's a man that you're sending to look at a woman, there's a difference of opinion as to that whether that's even permissible. If it's a woman like your mother, your sister, it's definitely permissible, and she can describe the potential spouse's face and hands for you. But she cannot describe any other parts because women are allowed to see other women's hair, right? So let's say you send your mother and she goes and she looks and she saw the potential spouse's hair. So she goes back to you. She's not allowed to say, oh, her hair is brown and long and wavy, halfway down her back and so on and so forth. No, she has to say something like, I'm pretty sure her hair will please you. Something very vague that doesn't give any description. Okay, and then he says, وَحَلَّ لَهُمَا حَتَّى نَظَرُ الْفَرْجِ. So once the marriage is concluded and the contract is valid, and here by nikah, we're talking about the religious marriage, right? Not the civil marriage. I forgot to mention that in the definition of marriage. Like civil marriages that are done in, depending on the country, I don't know how it works in the USA, but in Canada, you have these certain people that are authorized by the state or the province to go and perform civil marriages. So they'll gather, the the bride and the groom together in one room, and some usually with other family members. Definitely, there's witnesses required. And basically, he just asks you like, do you consent to take so and so as your husband? You can, consent to have so and so as your wife, and then the spouses say yes, and then the marriage is concluded. So that's not a marriage in from an Islamic point of view. So if the spouses after that ceremony, without doing the nikah ceremony, they have intercourse, they just committed zina. Right. So that's important. People should know that. So they're not saying to not get civil marriages done because they're actually important to protect some of the rights of the spouses in non-Muslim countries. In case there's ever problems and matters have to go to court, this should always be like a last resort for Muslims to seek justice from non-Muslims. But if that's the only way and it's an important right that needs to be fulfilled, then yes, it's permissible to go to court to settle it. But you're not allowed to ever take more than what you're entitled to when you go to court. So it's important that you know your rights and where they end. Okay. Yeah, so that was about the civil marriage. So yeah, once you do the nikah contract, and it's valid, then both spouses are allowed to see each other completely, even their private parts, right? So Sidi Ahmed al-Dardir, he says that the hadith which speaks of people going blind if they see the private parts of their spouse, it has no basis, basically. All right, and then he says kel milk. This is not relevant for us nowadays, so I'm going to skip that. Then he says وَتَمَتُّعٌ بِغَيْرِ دُبُورٍ. This will be our last mas'ala for the day. So, and I'll have to talk about it for a while because a lot of things that fall under that. But basically, it becomes allowed with a lawful nikah contract to physically enjoy your spouse in every way except through anal intercourse. Okay, so بغير dubur. So what's meant by dubur here is like the rectum here. As for like the anus, it's actually still part of the outer part of the body, so it can be used for enjoyment. I don't know why people would want to do that, but it's their thing. So now I'm going to talk about um, lawful and unlawful sexual practices and other connect in contraception and abortion and in vitro fertilization. Right? These are all issues that people want to know what the ruling is, from the Sharia's perspective and more specifically from the Maliki school's perspective. So, if you have children around, now would be the time to tell them to go play outside because it's going to be explicit, right? So, concerning basically everything is permissible except anal sex, as I said. And then as for, so this includes like oral sex for men and women. It includes like what they call like assisted masturbation, basically when the spouse helps the other spouse, basically pleasures the other spouse using the hand or the finger, right? And also concerning oral sex, though, for when it's the woman giving it to the man, it's disliked for the man to ejaculate inside the mouth of the woman because it's the sperm is a najasa, it's an impurity in the Maliki school. So therefore, it would cause najasa to enter her mouth, and even if she spits it, which she has to if it happened, it's haram for her to swallow it intentionally. But let's say like she couldn't get it all out and some of it got mixed with her saliva, it would mean that she swallowed some najasa. So that's why it's makruh. And if she thinks that she can't be safe from swallowing najasa, if that happens, it's haram to actually ejaculate inside the mouth. Now, as for ejaculating outside the vagina, like in other parts of the outer parts of her body, it is permissible anywhere, whether it be the breasts or anywhere. Okay. So that's also permissible. And then as for like the contraception, because this brings us to the topic of contraception, because basically normally you would ejaculate inside the vagina. Right? That's how you have children. So uh, so what's the ruling on contraception? So if it's like something that's just done like basically for enjoyment, if let's say like the husband, it's his thing that he likes to basically ejaculate outside the vagina once in a while or whatever, then it's just permissible. There's no doubt about that. Um, except that it requires the permission of the wife, basically, because maybe she really wants to get pregnant, so she doesn't like want to miss out on like opportunities, right? But if it doesn't bother her, then it's meaning that to lose that opportunity that one time or these few times, whatever, then it's permissible. But as for like long term, like people who are like always using contraception to either to avoid having children altogether or to space out births, but not for health reasons, like just to limit births, like, oh, we only want to have 3 children or just 2 children or just one. That is haram from the Maliki school's perspective. So because it's the scholars consider that the verses that prohibit us from killing our children, it applies to children who are already conceived and to those who are not already conceived. So that rules out like the continuous use of contraception. And then when contraception is lawful, like when let's say you're trying to space out the births to protect the mother's health. Sometimes the doctors will give this advice, right? Then you can follow the advice, but you can only use certain means of contraception. You can use the method of ejaculating outside the vagina. You can use the calendar method, where you look at the days during which the ovulation happens, and there's certain days during the month where the woman is particularly fertile, whereas in other parts of the month she is highly likely to not be. You can also use condoms, like male condoms, but you can't use anything that would require inserting an object inside the woman's vagina, like IUDs, I think they're called in English. Um, and what else? As for birth control pills, it depends. They're either disliked or permissible, depending on the effects on the health of the woman. So if the doctor says it'll cause negative health effects, then it's disliked to use that, and otherwise it's permissible. But you can't get like permanent. It's haram to get permanent contraception, like tying the tubes for the woman, or vasectomy for men. That's haram to undergo this procedure. Okay, so that's for contraception. Okay, now as for in vitro fertilization, for this is the opposite. So first people who don't want children, now people who want children, and then they can't. So as for in vitro fertilization, even if the sperm, is taken from the man in a lawful way, let's say like it's done by like the his wife pleasuring him, and then it's collected, it's still haram because of the fact that it requires strangers looking at the woman's private parts to be able to actually like extract the ovula and then put back in the fertilized egg or ovula after it's combined with the sperm cell. So yeah, so and basically having children is not considered a necessity by the Maliki. So that here's an example. Actually, when I was talking earlier about dividing things into necessities and needs and basically ornamentations of life. So having children is just permissible, right? It's not a need. It's not an obligation or a recommendation in and of itself, right? So now you want to do something haram, which is uncovering the aura in front of a man or woman, right? It's only the husband who's allowed to see that. So maybe if the husband was the doctor doing the insertion, that's probably the only time it could be permissible, is if the husband is the surgeon who is going to extract the ovula and then put the fertilized egg back in. That's the only scenario. Yeah, so basically you don't do something haram in order to reach something which is just permissible. Same thing with circumcision, for in the Maliki school, men who convert to Islam at maturity, it's haram for them to get circumcised, even though normally it's like a stress sunnah to have circumcision. But if you convert later in life, because you're gonna have to have either a man or a woman who's not your wife touching or even looking at your private parts to do this operation. So that's why. Same principle here for the in vitro. And then abortion. Abortion is haram in all situations except one, regardless of whether the embryo has reached 40 days of life or not. Like if it's before, after, same difference. The only case where it's permissible is when the mother's life is in serious danger. The doctors say she's not gonna make it if she continues with this pregnancy. In that case, it's permissible to terminate the pregnancy because the mother's life has precedence over the baby's, because um, she has already relations and involvements in the dunya, right? She already has like family members and friends and maybe a husband and children, and so it would be a worse consequence to lose her than to lose somebody who doesn't have like any connections, right, in the dunya yet. All right, so I guess yeah, that's what I wanted to say for today. And the next topic, وَخُطْبَةٌ بِخِطْبَةٍ, we'll be looking at engagement and basically all the things that should happen and shouldn't happen as far as preliminary talks about marriage, and all the way till the marriage contract. That's what Sheikh Zuhair said he would take, I think, maybe a lesson to talk about this in detail, to basically he says there's a lot of misconceptions and people doing things they shouldn't be doing, so he wants to clarify these matters. And Allahu A'lam where we'll get to. All right, so I'll go in the chat, look at questions. Okay. Okay, pre-ejaculation. Okay, wait. Oh, I think there's somebody else here. Okay, so first question. If a woman has issue that makes sexual intercourse painful but is working on overcoming, is marriage recommended? I don't know. I haven't looked at this issue. Is a woman virgin as long as she has consummated a marriage? Yes. Yes, it has to do with the consummation of the marriage. Yes. Where in Canada are you? Eastern Canada. Is a pick on a matrimonial site that will maybe we'll cover that next time. The whole thing about matrimonial sites. If no, if Sheikh doesn't talk about it, I will inshallah ask questions about that during the our next lesson with him, inshallah. Yes, and somebody answered. So yes, the asl would should be no, like you said, but we'll see what we'll let Sheikh answer that. Okay, what about pre-ejaculation? Is it disliked for oral? Sheikh did not mention pre-ejaculation. And also it should be that it shouldn't be disliked because he said that he didn't talk about any dislike for men giving oral sex to women. And of course there's always going to be at least a little bit of najasa there. So if you by analogy it should the pre-ejaculation shouldn't make it disliked. Okay, so in vitro fertilization is not allowed in Maliki fiqh. I don't want to say Maliki fiqh because this is a new issue. So we'd have to look at what all the traditional Maliki scholars, meaning not those that are swayed by things that are outside the madhab, but those who stick to the madhab and in its principles, we'd have to ask, see what they're saying about it. So what I'm saying, I'm taking it from Sheikh al-Maghili, is one of my shuyukh. He's a big Maliki scholar in southern Algeria. He's also like the qadi for a large number of basically Bedouin tribes and other inhabitants of the Sahara Desert. So that's his position, and I agree with it from the perspective of like the rationale behind it. Okay, so you said a stranger cannot see the women's privates, but how about when a woman goes to the gym, gynecologist to have a baby? Is that possible? Yeah, so this is different because I said having children is merely permissible. But here, if we're talking about a woman who is about to give birth, there are health issues that need to be checked out. So I haven't like asked specifically about this, but I know that it is permissible for women to be checked out by doctors, right? And of course, there's rules about that. And of course, it should be a woman, right? But if it's a man, there's like specific rules and parameters to that I'm not going to get into here. But yeah, it's the general rule is that it's permissible for a woman to go to a doctor. Let's say she should always go for a female doctor first, and in which case the female doctor can see her aura, and by aura I mean like anything that's an aura for a woman when she looks at a woman, which is between the navel and the knees. Anything else isn't even aura for a woman when looking at another woman. And for the man, she all her body is aura except for face and hands, right? So the doctor, like say that there's a problem on the woman's arm, right? The doctor is allowed to look at the area on the arm because he needs to do that to be able to treat her properly. Like if she couldn't find a woman doctor to do this job. So yeah, because here it's a need. The seeing the doctor is a need, so it's not just a tahsini thing, like from the beautifications of life. So it's an actual need, and therefore, whenever it's a necessity or a need which is akin. The necessities, the fatwa is that you can do certain things that are normally haram uh, to get this need or necessity fulfilled. So that's the rationale. It's a bit technical. This the muftis understand, of these things very well. But that's the rationale. Okay, when are we going to talk about the pillars? Pillars of marriage? It's a few pages from now. I think that's like 4 pages from now in Khalid, but it depends on the pace that Sheikh Zuhair goes at it. But we'll eventually get there, inshallah. Okay, the jinn. Yeah, we talked about the jinn issue. Have the dua said in the beginning. Yeah, somebody in another course of mine transcribed it. I'll try to remember to copy paste it in the group uh, under the video for this class, inshallah, this session. Okay, I have IUD. I'm convert now divorced. Should I remove it? Um, Now that it's already inside, that's what's actually the problem is to have it inserted. So Allah alam, it seems like if it doesn't cause like health issues, it should be permissible to leave it. And I mean, if contraception is permissible for you based on the ruling of contraception that I gave earlier, yeah. And if it would cause negative health repercussions, then it should be disliked to keep it in. Wallahu alam. Okay, I've been told by Shadi and others that between lower breasts and knees is awrah for women. That is for salat. That's not for women looking at other women. So there's awrah, there's so many details about awrah. I have a whole document that's several pages that's not ready to be published yet, but it looks at the different types of awrah between the different types of people. There are contraception implanted elsewhere permissible, like that implanted into the arm? Yeah, that's a good question. It should be. It should be permissible, but Allah alam, I haven't looked into it. But again, permissible if contraception in and of itself is permissible for that couple. And again, you would have to look at the health repercussions of it to see if it's negative repercussions, then dislike, and if there's no negative repercussions, then should be permissible. And inshallah, Allahu alam. Okay, we're gonna end here because we don't want the recording to be too long. But and I'll post the video very shortly, inshallah. So if you have more questions, then just add a comment under the video, and I'll answer as soon as I can, inshallah. And like I said yesterday, I won't answer every question. You know, there's some questions that I just don't have the answer to, and my shuyukh are busy. I'm already bugging them with enough things as it is. And some questions are just not relevant to, so I won't answer those. But anything that I can answer and that's relevant, I will answer بإذن. إذا نسأل الله أن يعلمنا ما ينفعنا وينفعنا بما علمنا إنه على ما يشاء قدير وبالإجابة جدير ونعم المولى ونعم النصير وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.